I tell you, I need to do this every once in a while just for that. You know, by the way, this isn't just Father's Day. It's also an anniversary. 17 years ago today, we moved into this building. Yeah. How about that? Opened it on Father's Day 2001, coming out of the chapel. And we had been doing 3 services there in the morning for years and years and years. Now, I should tell you, since you're at the 10 o'clock, in those days, we called the 8 o'clock service the Wax Museum. We called it that because you'd look out from the front and people were kind of, they hadn't had enough caffeine yet. But, oh well, they got with the program. You know, it is Father's Day, for better or for worse. How many of you had a father? Yeah, I think so. Although I know, having said that in some cases, they weren't all that great. And in fact, that's what led me 25 years ago to write the first book I ever wrote, which has been out of publication for some time, called A Dad Who Loves You. Because I ran into so many people, men and women, who had horrible experiences with a dad when they were growing up. Just awful. And it caused them to have a difficult time embracing God as Father or understanding that. It's what a psychiatrist called parataxic distortion. And that is, you take your experiences of a person in one area of life and those feelings and all the rest, and you transfer them over to other people or situations, even though they aren't the same. And so I did a survey and got these things back from people, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of them. And they were very honest about things that happened to them when they were growing up. 40% of them had fabulous relationships with their dads. 40% of them had horrible relationships with their dads, and the other 20 were somewhere in between. And by the way, there were some mom issues too. And it's not all that simple, kind of fascinating when you interview. Anyway, so I wanted them to understand that whatever their earthly father was like, there is one who gives us the template of what a real dad is, what a real man is, and that is God himself. And you've really got to understand it from his truth and begin to integrate that into your life so that you can be everything that God designed you to be. Now, we are at a time in society where even people are questioning, is it okay to be a man, right? And so you see stuff like toxic masculinity and all these other buzzwords that are out there that are absurd. I mean, they just are. And as a matter of fact, if you go back to the first chapter of the book of Genesis, right in the very beginning, in the very first chapter, it says in verse 21, so God created man in his own image. In the image of God, he created him. Male and female, he created them. And he blessed them. So male, female, both good, both blessed. And since we're talking about fathers and Father's Day, you've got to get underneath that all to fathers, to men. What does it mean to be a man? What does that really look like? Well, we learn, in my opinion, some great background stuff for that coming from the book of Matthew. If you'll turn with me in the book of Matthew to the 16th chapter. And it's a situation that happened in Jesus's life at a critical juncture. And this is what it says in Matthew 16:13. It says, when Jesus came into the region of Caesarea Philippi, he asked his disciples, saying, who do men say that I, the Son of Man, am? And it says, so they said, well, some say John the Baptist, some Elijah, or others Jeremiah, or one of the prophets. And he said to him, but who do you say that I am? Simon Peter answered and said, you are the Christ, the Son of the living God. Jesus answered and said to him, blessed are you, Simon Bar-Jonah, for flesh and blood has not revealed this to you, but my Father who is in heaven. And I also say to you that you are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church, and the gates of Hades shall not prevail against it. Let me read that 18th verse in a little bit different way. That word Peter is the word rock. He's really saying, I also say to you that you are rocky, and on this rock I'll build my church, and the gates of Hades shall not prevail against it. All right. Now, in that section of the word, we learn a whole lot about what it means to be a man. First of all, understand the setting where this took place was absolutely superb. They were in a town that was known as Caesarea Philippi, which is in the very northern part of the Sea of the Sea of Galilee. It's north of that on the border with Lebanon. And you can see it in this picture. I took this, I think, on the last trip I did in Israel. And in Caesarea Philippi, they'd gone there to just kind of decompress. And they were standing in front of this massive red rock wall. And in the middle of that red rock wall, there is a huge cave, and there are all kinds of inscriptions, and it's very ornately carved and so forth, because it was a worship center for the god Pan. But more than that, it is out of that rock that the water you see here, which is a tremendous amount of water, comes. This is the headwaters of one of the tributaries that forms the Sea of Galilee, which becomes the Jordan River. And this is maybe the biggest of all the tributaries. It's absolutely spectacularly beautiful there. Now, it's important that you understand this, that they were sitting by this river, or they were walking or standing, talking, or whatever. But the backdrop was this massive red rock. While they were there, Jesus gave the guys a pop quiz. I don't know who likes pop quizzes. I've never been into them. But at any rate, he probably almost casually said to them, what are people saying about me? Who are people saying that I am anyway? Well, thought about it a little bit. Interesting you should ask. Some people think you're John the Baptist come back to life again because he had been beheaded. And others say you're Elijah or Jeremiah or one of the other prophets. Now, I'm sure Jesus just let those words sink in a bit, that they'd marinate in that for a few moments. And then he made it really personal. But how about you? Who do you say that I am? Well, now you're right on the spot, right? What you want to be like is like when you were in school. Remember when you didn't have the answer, and so you try to hide behind another student so the teacher wouldn't see you? Surely you've all been there, right? Come on. I am not the only one. And at any rate, so I'm sure they were all kind of waiting for somebody else. They didn't need to, because Peter was the shoot from the lip kind of a guy. Boom. He always just came out with something, whether it was good or not so good. It was just out there. Whatever was on his head and his heart, it was out there. And so he just steps right up and says, you are the Christ, the Son of the living God. That's who you are. Wow. And I'm sure the other guys looked at each other. Did he really say that out loud? You are the Christ, the Son of the living God. Honestly, he said that? What's Jesus going to say? Interestingly enough, he didn't rebuke him. As a matter of fact, he affirmed him. Blessed are you, Simon Bar-Jonah. Flesh and blood hasn't revealed this to you, but my Father who is in heaven. Wow. And you are Petros, Peter, Rocky. And upon this Petra, one's a masculine form, another's a feminine form of the word, two different things. And on this Petra, I will build my church, and the gates of Hades shall not prevail against it. You are a rock. And on the bedrock confession of faith that you have just made, that I am the Christ, the Son of the living God, I will build my church. He didn't say, you are Peter and I'm going to build my church on you. That is not what he said. You are a rock so that you reflect the substantial rock that you're standing on. Remember, you've got this absolutely amazing rock behind him, huge, overwhelming. And he's helping them to understand this is the foundation of life. You build your life on me, you reflect me. And everything in your life is going to work the way it's designed to. Wow. Now, guys, today I'm going to sort of tailor this to guys, although, ladies, especially if you're single, it's going to tell you something about the kind of guys you should look for if you're fixing to get married. And, this is what a man is meant to be. He's meant to be a rock that reflects the rock that he stands on, the foundation of life, which is Jesus. Now, what do we know about rocks? First of all, they are solid. They are committed. They are all in. And there's no doubt about it. They are rocks. Being all in. You've been all in things in your life before, surely. A couple years ago, Betty and I took a vacation. We were in San Diego, and we decided one day to go to that San Diego Safari Park. I don't know if you've ever been there. And we got there, and it was kind of cool, and we saw a sign advertising a zip line, and we thought, oh, that would be fun. We had not done a zip line before. And, whatever, we're here, let's do it. So we sign up, and then as we're getting closer to the booth there and they're handing out all this gear, you're thinking, what's that all for? I mean, do I really need all this harness and all this stuff? And then they, put it all on, and now you've got to go through a mini course and a little zip line so they can show you how to brake. And you're thinking, brake? What are you talking about? Isn't this a ride? And it starts and it stops. And, whatever. And they put you out in a vehicle, and then you're driving past the rhinoceroses and hippos and lions and all this stuff as you're wending your way up this mountain. And this should be registering in your head, right? No, you're just looking at the animals. Oh, this is really cool. You get up there, and then you get out of this rig, and you sort of start going up these steps. Holy cow. And now you're standing on a platform that you can see through that's 130 feet off the ground. And you're thinking, there's nothing here to catch me. And they're saying, okay, come on up here. Let's get this thing show on the road. And what? And snap. And you're snapped into this thing. Okay, you're next. Well, when you step off that platform, you're all in. That thing is a 2/3 of a mile long, and you are whistling. Your hair's flying back. And, you're committed. No doubt about it. And you're whistling over the rhinos and all these other wild animals. Oh! And then you realize, I'm going to die. Because this thing just stops. I mean, it just stops. And you are not stopping. You're not slowing down. Wow. What was that brake thing they were talking about? And you get it all figured out, and you stop, and you say, oh, that was cool. I had no doubt about it. It was going to be great. Yeah, right? You know what is that? How many of you have ever bought a house? Remember the first time you bought a house and signed the loan and then wanted to throw up? You remember that at all? Buyer's remorse. Is that house going to fall down before I even occupy it? I mean, what did I just do? And I'm sunk. Well, all in. You're either all in with the Lord or you're not. There is no sort of door number 3 with that. And if you really want to have life the way it was designed to be by the Lord himself, then you're going to be all in. Now, that's where Peter was, and there's no doubt about that. This was not the only time that he would go on the line for the Lord, flat out there. He'd do it again, and he'd do it again, and he'd do it again. He was a guy who was solidly committed. He was a guy who was all in. And so you think about your own life. Are you there? Are you solid when it comes to living your life in the Lord and for the Lord? Are you a rock, Or are you gravel? Are you sand? Are you dust? What are you? Now, I'm not suggesting to you that if you're not all in at this very moment and you're here and you don't have a personal relationship with Jesus, that you're an awful person. It's not what I'm saying at all. What I am saying is if you want to live life the way it was ever designed to be, first of all, you're going to put your faith in Jesus Christ. And then you're going to build your life on him. Because that is the only place you will have a firm foundation. That is the only place you will find the stability that everyone looks for in life. Without that, you're going to find yourself tossed to and fro by all kinds of stuff that comes. What'd they say in the latest poll? Oh, no. And you're going to just be, oh, what's happening with the government today? Oh, what's happening with the economy? Oh, what's happening with the weather? Oh. Instead of just that rock solid, secure life that you have when you place your faith in Jesus Christ and go after him. That's how he designed our lives to be lived. Many times when Betty and I have found ourselves against some struggle in life, some challenge, we've said to each other, how in the world do people do this without Jesus? I mean, it's hard enough to do it with him. Physical difficulties and all kinds of stuff that you just go through in life. Life happens. It happens to everybody. Doo-doo occurs. And, and if you want to have stability and strength going through those things, then it begins with having that solid relationship with God as he has made himself known in Jesus Christ. Be solid. The second thing that we learn about is that we are to be immovable. And that too is what a rock is. It is immovable. If you think about that giant red rock backdrop, it ain't going anywhere. You can put your back on that thing and shove as hard as you want to, and you know what? It's going to laugh at you. It's not going to move. Rocks, solid rocks like that are immovable. It's something that's sometimes hard to learn. My dog and I have this game we play. He's a big standard poodle, really fast. Every night after he finishes his dinner, we play 5. And what that means is I go into some room with this chew toy thing that he has, and I launch the thing to the end of the room, and then I run as fast as I can to hide somewhere. And then he'll run in and get the thing. I've got to get a head start or I'm dead, right? So I take off running and I someplace, and then I hear he's trying to find me wherever I am. Well, just a few months ago, and over Christmas time, right before Christmas, I'd done something, screwed up my leg somehow. I don't know how. Yeah, and I didn't feel like doing 5, but there he is. Come on, I just ate. It's time. And yeah, what do you do? All right. I'll do a hobbled 5. And so I go in and I launch this thing and it's on. I mean, I got to hide. And so I'm running out there, as fast as I can. And I cut through this corner that I always cut through so lithe and supple. And I zoom, and my leg doesn't do what my mind is doing, and I launched my face into a solid rock fireplace. Boom! I mean, my tooth splits off, and I'm cut up. Bang! I hit the floor, and then the dog's there. I win! I found you! I'm seeing stars, and get out of here. I'm here to tell you that fireplace is immovable. It ain't going anywhere. I went someplace, but that thing didn't. And that's how God has designed us, guys, to be at his men. And it's a huge challenge because the world is telling you you should not be men. You should be defanged. You should be something that you weren't designed to be, that somehow it's not okay for you to be a provider. It's not okay for you to be a leader. It's not okay for you to be the one who creates a secure place for your family. It's not okay for you to do everything that God says in the Word that you're designed to do. And so we waffle. We say, well, gee, maybe it isn't a good idea to this, that. pretend to be something that we weren't ever called or designed to be. And again, back to the polls. We read those polls. Oh, wow, listen to what's happening here. Look what those people are saying here. I just saw this in a movie last night. Are you immovable? Or do you allow your commitment to Jesus to waffle? I see it all the time. As the days go by, it seems to me to be picking up speed. So, for instance, 20 years ago, if some guy would have been living with a gal, the last thing they would have wanted was for anybody to find out. I mean, wouldn't happen. It would be done totally in secret. Now, introduce, hey, this is my whatever. We just bought a house. We've got 3 kids. What? What? So you are totally movable in a relationship to her. You're not totally committed to her at all because you're not willing to invest yourself like that. Is that what God says you are to be as a godly man? I don't think so. What are you thinking? Yes, I realize TV glamorizes that, and I realize that's how your friends are living. Who gives a rip? You want to have life and you want to have it more abundantly, then you stand on the rock and you reflect the rock in the way you live. And you don't find yourself just moving. So you cheat somebody else in your business because after all, business is business. No, business is a place where you get to represent Jesus and have a life that's different from those who are around you because of whose you are. You know, real men don't abuse their wives. Real men don't abuse their kids. Real men reflect Jesus in every relationship they have. And what he calls us to be is that immovable force for him. Now, as we think about that, he also calls us to be authentic. You know, rocks are rocks are rocks, right? If you take, well, geodes, okay, I'll give you that. But normally speaking, if you take a rock and you break it in half, what do you have? 2 rocks. They're just the same as the other one was, only smaller, right? But they are authentically rocks, the real deal. That's what Peter was. Peter was an authentic guy. Yes, he blew it in occasions, no question about it, but he was who he was. He was built to be this leader. He was a guy who just kind of stepped where angels feared to tread. He was the one who, when Jesus was talking about the fact that, you know, he was going to be crucified and die and be buried and raised on the 3rd day, Peter was the one, never happened to you, no way, I'm not going to allow it to happen. If everybody else falls away from you, I will be there. I mean, you could count on him to be that kind of a guy. Now, as a matter of fact, he would end up denying the Lord. And he would completely fall apart when he realized what he had just done. Why did he fall apart? Because that isn't authentically who he was. He hadn't been true to himself. He hadn't been authentically him. Jesus brought him back. Later, after he made this huge confession of faith, Jesus said, you know, I'm going to die. He said, actually, you're going to deny me 3 times before the sun is up. But I'll tell you what, Peter, when you return to me, strengthen the brethren. You might take a detour, but you're going to be back. You're going to get it. It's going to come to you. And you're going to be that man I designed you to be. And when you do that, I want you to pass that on and on and on and on. Be authentically that kind of a rock. God's men are God's men. They don't live for the Lord on Sunday and live for the devil Monday through Saturday. They are consistently God's men. Now again, the devil is going to suggest to you, you don't need to live that way. If you go back in the 3rd chapter of the book of Genesis, it's really a great story. A horrible situation, but the way it's told is amazing to me. It starts out in Genesis 3, now the serpent, the devil, was more cunning than any beast of the field which the Lord God had made. And he said to Eve, has God indeed said, you shall not eat of every tree of the garden? And the woman said to the serpent, oh, we may eat of the trees of the garden, but of the fruit of the tree which is in the midst of the garden, God has said, you shall not eat it, nor shall you touch it, lest you die. Then the serpent said to the woman, oh, you won't die. God didn't really say that. God knows in the day you eat of it, your eyes will be open and you'll be like God, knowing good and evil. So when the woman saw that the tree was good for food, pleasant to the eyes, desirable to make one wise, she took of its fruit and ate. And she also gave it to her husband with her, and he said, looks good to me. The devil whispers, you don't need to be authentic. You don't need to be authentically a believer in the Lord Jesus. You don't need to be the real deal through and through. And so you find yourself buying the lie. No. God's men are authentic. They are Ephesians 5:25 men. Husbands, love your wives as Christ loved the church and gave his life for her. You know, they are the Romans 12 verses 1 and 2 kind of guys. Don't be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind, that you may prove what is that good and acceptable and perfect will of God. They are rocks, and they reflect the rock on which they stand. You know, as God's men, we live the way we live because of Jesus and for no other reason. And when we build our lives on him and reflect it, all those around us can see what real manhood is all about. Life as it was designed to be lived. Now, you may wonder, well, how does that really play out in real life? Just to give you a glimpse of that, I've asked a friend of mine, a guy who spent some of those growing up years as a part of our church. I've asked him to come and to share just a little bit of the story of his family with us. And there's a specific reason I have done this, because you are going to see what it looks like for a man to make a decision to be God's man and pass it to a son who passes it to sons who passes it to all of those around him. Michael, you're on.
There's a story that is told during our family gatherings, and it's a story that I must have heard over 1,000 times, but every time I hear this story again, I can't help but to grab a seat and keep my eyes glued onto the storyteller. The story goes something like this. The year is 1942, and it's the darkest hour of a cold, cold night. We find my grandfather, who's a 19-year-old kid at this time, lying in a field of mud and bodies somewhere near the city of Leningrad in one of the worst battles of World War II. He's cold, he's wet, and out of the 12,000 Russian soldiers that were ordered to attack the Nazi front lines that morning, he is one of maybe 12 that's still alive. He's lying there and he's waiting for night to come. Nighttime means that maybe he can get up and run back to the cover of his own front lines in the cover of the dark. But when night comes, the Germans start shooting their flares, and it's so bright outside that standing up and running would have been suicide. He lies there all night, and as he digs in, he puts his chin on the back of his palm to keep his face out of the mud. And just as he does that, a bullet grazes his hand just inches from his face. A second one rips through his backpack and nearly tosses him over. The Germans are so close, he can hear their shouts as officers bark orders from the trenches. Any moment now, someone will find him in that field and finish him off. He's lying there and he's wishing for a rifle, a shovel, anything at all to defend himself for even a few more seconds of life. But earlier that morning when they were ordered to attack, there was more men than there were guns. They were handed one gun for every 3 men, and my grandfather was handed a pack of 5 bullets in order to run with the hope of finding a rifle somewhere along the way. He lies there all night, and when morning finally comes, the German soldier finds him in that field, kicks him in the ribs, sticks a rifle to his forehead, and then he says something to him that ultimately changes the life of this 19-year-old kid. Speaking in broken Russian, he says, "I don't know who it is that you pray to, but I've been shooting at you all night, and I could not hit you." With that, my grandfather's pulled from the ground and marched off to serve 4 years in some of the most brutal and horrid concentration camps that our history has ever seen. But there, in some of the darkest hours of our world, a time when war, hate, and division were keen, this 19-year-old kid now believed that God spared his life for something greater, and he started to live that way. Surrounded by young men from all over the world, from America, Britain, Poland, Russia, the Jews that were there, he gave up his own breadcrumbs to those on the verge of starvation. He took the place of others and received beatings that he didn't deserve. And just when it seemed like there was nothing else to live for behind those barbed wire fences, he found purpose and hope in serving others. From his story, our family has accepted the following principles into the way that we live our lives to this day. Defend the weak, protect the fatherless, respect your elders, and contribute to your community. You see, when Jesus becomes the foundation in a man's life, that man becomes a solid, immovable force. That man becomes a rock that his family can lean on for generations to come long after he's gone. But if you remove that rock, you can get stories like Brianne's, a classmate of mine who took her own life over a bridge. You remove that rock, and you get stories like Johan's, a classmate of mine who took his own life in his dorm. You remove that rock, and you get stories like Juan's, a normal teen who couldn't quite find a way to fit in, so he decided he wanted to take his life. You remove that rock, and you get stories like the knockout game. The knockout game is something we saw in the fall of 2013, where we saw teens all across our country involved in this game where they would run up and they would slug unsuspecting senior citizens or homeless people on the street. And the way that you win this game was by knocking them out. Now, we all typically ask ourselves the same kind of questions when we hear about this kind of stuff going on. What is wrong with our society? What is wrong with our teens? Isn't anyone raised with any rules or principles anymore? To be honest, for the longest time, I was beginning to think that the only rule that stuck to me from my own childhood was more of a trick that my mom used on us when she wanted to stop us kids from eating too much sugar. She would tell us, if you eat too much sugar, your butt cheeks are gonna stick together. To this day, I gotta make sure that everything's okay back there if I have a big donut or something. But in the fall of 2013, at the height of our anger and frustrations, what we were seeing going on in our country and with our teens, my brothers and I, along with a few friends of ours, were suddenly reminded of another principle we were raised with a long time ago. Defend the weak, protect the fatherless, respect your elders, and contribute to your community. So we created Flash Love. Flash Love is an organization that has taken the city by storm. We're inviting people from all over our community to come together, storm streets, adult care homes, and care for fatherless children. We've delivered donated cars, Thanksgiving dinners, and firewood to families in need. We've cleaned streets while feeding the homeless, sometimes at the same time. We're creating a culture that is making leaders of teens that then turn around and they create leaders of their peers, and all the while, they're discovering that they are the rocks on which God is going to build this community on. Fathers, sons, husbands, brothers here today, are we willing to become the rocks that we were created to be? Are we willing to become the rocks that our family, our community, and our world can lean on long after we're out of here? Oh, and by the way, Juan's shoes don't belong with these other 2 pairs. You see, because when Juan's suicide attempt was unsuccessful, Juan was brought into one of Flash Love's mentorship programs where he was introduced to people who loved him and who still wanted him to be here. Juan graduated from Heritage High School just this last week, and Juan's sitting right there in the front row.
Testing, testing. There we go. That's what it looks like in flesh and blood. You care because somebody cared for you. They loved you in the Lord, and they helped you to understand what God's love looks like. And they passed it on, and they passed it on, and they passed it on, and they passed it on. Guys, that's what God has for you and for me. But if we're ever going to get there, we need to be godly men. We need to be rocks whose lives are solidly standing on the rock, Christ Jesus. You know, to help you remember that, on Mother's Day, we gave all the women roses. Today, we're going to give all the men rocks. And there's a reason for that. We want you to carry that rock. Think about this. Goliath was destroyed by one smooth stone. That's it. One smooth stone. You carry that thing and you find yourself waffling, you find yourself up against a challenging decision or whatever, and you just remember who you are and whose you are. Because Jesus loved you so much, he gave his life for you, that you might find life in him. He who believes in me, Jesus said, will have life eternally. God built us to be rocks standing on the rock. That's who we want to be, and that's what we want to do. Let's pray.